everybody. This is Shannon and Kathy. You're listening to Terror Talk. How's it going, Kathy?
Woohoo, good. How are you?
Woohoo. We are in our brand new studio, so we're pretty excited about that. Perhaps we sound different. We're not sure. We're excited about it. Hopefully it sounds a little better. Today on the show, we are going to discuss Mindhunter, the Netflix series, both season 1 and season 2. We're going to break it down season 1 first, and then we'll talk a little bit of review, a little bit of thoughts we had about season 1. Then we'll take a little break and we'll go into season 2. And then we'll do our What the Hell segments, which we prefer. We like them very much, and we're always happy when they're in an episode.
It's been a while.
I know.
What the hell?
What the hell, man? Yeah, because we don't do them when we do the true crime psychology episodes, like when we did Manson, when we did Dahmer, Bundy. We don't do the what the hell. Maybe we should change that because we miss them.
Maybe, but we're back.
Maybe a little missing is good. I don't know. We thought what we would do is we would play the season 1 trailer of the Netflix TV series for you to sort of set us up and then have a conversation. So let's do that.
It's not easy butchering people. It's hard work. Physically and mentally, I don't think people realize you need to vent. You know, there's a lot more like me.
Do you think so?
40 years ago, your FBI was founded hunting down John Dillinger. Now, we have extreme violence between strangers.
We travel around the country and teach FBI techniques to cops.
You guys mind if I bother you for a minute?
She was found cuffed and lashed to the bed.
What people won't do to each other. There's nothing people won't do.
How can we help?
We should be using every resource we can, talking to the smartest people we find from the broadest possible spectrum.
Are criminals born? Or are they formed?
Psychopaths are convinced that there's nothing wrong with them, so these men are virtually impossible to study. Yet you have found a way in near-perfect laboratory conditions.
Hello, ladies.
That's what makes this so exciting and potentially so far-reaching.
I can't let these guys rub off on me. The way they view sex.
And women.
It is not our job to commiserate with these people. It is our job to electrocute them.
We can't like everything we do. We're talking to serial killers.
Serial killers.
New terminology.
I'm trying to warn you, your attitude is going to bite you in the ass.
So young to be ruining people's lives. What did you do?
You're developing a pattern of behavior that will not sustain you here. Agent Ford, if you leave, I can't help you.
There's no procedural rule book for how to talk to these people.
If any of this is going to work, we need to talk to more subjects. More!
You want truffles? You gotta get in the dirt with the pigs.
How do we get ahead of crazy if we don't know how crazy thinks?
I remember when I first saw that trailer, I was so excited. I was really excited. So for those of you who might be starting from square one, Mindhunter is on Netflix. It's a crime thriller, basically, based on a true crime book called Mindhunter Inside the FBI's Elite Serial Crime Unit, written by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker. The first season was on Netflix October 13th, 2017, and the second season was just released on the 16th of this month.
Season 2 was... Everyone was waiting for that for a while.
We were so excited.
My understanding is David Fincher has every actor, main character signed on for 5 seasons.
Oh, that's awesome because they're obviously setting up some longer tail stories, which we'll get into. Mindhunter revolves around FBI agents Holden Ford and Bill Tench, along with psychologist Wendy Carr, who originated the FBI's behavioral science unit within the training division at the FBI. They interview imprisoned serial killers in order to understand how they think, with the hope of applying this knowledge to solve ongoing cases. Just so you know, season 1 is set between 1977 and 1980. Kathy's gonna want to chime in here. It's the early days of like criminal psychology and criminal profiling, and season 2 is set in the years 80, 81, and covers the Atlanta murders, 79 to 81, respectively. Mm-hmm. I guess this was really the beginning of it all, huh?
Yeah, and you and I have addressed this in other episodes, which is the idea that sometimes it's easier to look at this horrific content and believe that someone must be purely evil in order for something like this to happen. And believe it or not, so did law enforcement and scientists and all these people back in, the
Right.
60s,
That was the way
70s.
they looked at it.
That's the way they looked at it. And what I appreciate so much about this as a forensic psychologist is how they start to introduce the idea of the behavioral unit into law enforcement and the Federal Bureau. And this is really that era where we start to discover serial killings. And if you remember from the first season, and it does continue into the second season, how law enforcement officers and FBI agents are going, why do you want to go in and interview these guys? They're pure evil. It's a waste of time. It's awful. And, Holden Ford and Wendy Carr and Bill Tench are going, you have to understand there's this whole other side to this that you don't understand. And they start to bring this into this field, and they merge the two. They merge psychology and criminology together. And I just think David Fincher does this so well.
Yeah, I mean, they really, especially season 1 lays all the groundwork, obviously. They were obviously looking at like a longer tail, 5 seasons. They knew true crime, as we know here on the podcast, is really popular. And so they set it up. And it's amazing for us because we get to see dramatized sort of what we know about the beginnings and how they knew that if they could know more about the people that they caught and talk to them, then they could actually affect change in the way that we hunt people, as they say, criminals in general, but especially serial killers, as they could start to what we now know as profiling. But they didn't do that then. They were just sort of hunting them like they would hunt anyone, catching criminals like they would catch any criminals. And they realized that was, that they could up their game, I guess.
Yeah, and they get more into this in the second season, but Bill Tench, who plays one of the agents, he's one of the main characters on the show, talks about how as a science, we can get ahead of this and understand it, then we might be able to stop it before it gets out of control, or even be able to look at some of the origins of it, because it is more complicated than good versus evil. There are environmental factors at bay. There are neurological, there's so many different components involved that have nothing to do with the presence of evil.
Absolutely not. And we talk about that a lot. So where we fall on it is that psychology is a complicated science. That's why it takes us so long to study it. So season 1, there's some things you sort of need to know. So we already mentioned you need to know that Holden Ford, Bill Tench, and Wendy Carr are the people that we're following. Those are the FBI agents plus psychologists that we're following. And they're based on real people, from what I know, from what I've read.
At least loosely based.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Groff, who plays Holden Ford, if anyone out there who's listening watched Glee, he was on Glee, and he does a lot of musical theater. He's a really talented guy. I actually couldn't stand him on Glee, and when I found out he was playing Holden Ford, I was like, and then I watched it and I was like, holy hell, this is a whole other version of this guy. And my understanding is David Fincher at times between takes has to stop and like, don't smile so much, dude, because he's this really friendly guy. And so it was an interesting pick, but you learn that this character is sort of newly out of school. He's very young. So that's part of this is a very character driven show, which I also love. It's not just here's one serial killer, here's the story. There's all of this character development and their individual stories, which they even build on in season 2. And you really start to get his personality at the beginning and why the Bureau would give him so much shit, because he really comes off as, I think he comes off pretty humble and just, I don't know, wet behind the ears. And
yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, so they have the characters we want, right? These are the stereotypes in a way. They're the new guy that's pushing the status quo. We always kind of want that because we kind of identify with that. We want to be, the young whippersnapper, as my grandmother used to say, that is pushing the status quo and trying to change. And then you have the sort of hardened veteran that also has been doing kind of a job that was not something that he was super passionate about, but it was something he was doing. He was going around and talking to cops about what they do with behavioral science. So you could tell he's in it, but he's the wisdom character. He's the wise guy that's going to take the young whippersnapper to the holy grail, right? Like, so.
And he's jaded.
He's jaded, but he's also the one that eventually, but he's also the one that's like, let's do this thing. And he's established the higher ups respect him, and they get stuff done in the very beginning, as we see in season 1, because he's well trusted.
Right. Holden couldn't have done it without him.
No way. So you've got those two teamed up, and then you have Wendy Carr, who's the psychologist that's brought in, and I feel like she's the character that rides like the moral compass of the joint.
And she's very unassuming, because you have to remember this is the 70s, and she's PhD, and she comes in, and they think that they're basically going to be in control in the situation, and she walks in with the brains behind the operation, and they're just completely blown away by what she delivers. I love her character.
Yeah. She asks a lot of questions. You see her kind of get used to it, and then by the time the end of season 1 comes, and certainly into season 2, she's definitely a unique third person. But I do think she plays the part of the like moral backbone of the situation. There's also a fourth character, speaking of moral backbone, that is there. That's like, I don't know, he's kind of their lackey in a way. He's like the guy they're training up. He happens to be Christian, I guess. And so he has some issue with some of the stuff that they do. And he plays a role, if you haven't seen it yet, but he plays an important part, but you kind of need that, guy to come in and do something for the story and then, piss off or whatever. But he's good. So those are the main characters you're watching. And then from the first season, you certainly have to know that Richard Speck plays a part. Speck is the guy so Ford goads Speck into talking sort of vilely by applauding him and using different kinds of language, right? I think it's really interesting the way that these FBI agents are starting to interview them, and then they get recorded interviewing them in particular ways, and that gets our young upstart into troubles. We do this a lot in psychology. Like, Holden speaks to the criminals in their language. It's kind of like, you hear us cuss, you hear us do different things, you're like, my therapist doesn't cuss, that kind of stuff, but you're using it for your audience. And so it's just important to know that Holden, by the end of season 1, has gotten into a place where he actually knows that to build rapport with these kinds of people, he's got to walk the walk, right? Talk the talk with them.
Yeah, it's its own form of mirroring, I guess, is he's just sort of going into their culture or their composure, or he's in some way becoming them. And it works.
Yeah, it works. And so it's just a big plot point. Richard Speck is the Birdman of Alcatraz, which we've seen portrayed in lots of different forms. But this is when he was young. I always remember like Shawshank Redemption, that guy with the bird in the library.
Oh, yeah.
That's who I think of when I think of the Birdman of Alcatraz. But, whatever. That was not him. And then the other thing you really have to take away is Ed Kemper, right?
Oh, my God. He played this role so well. And Ed Kemper, for those people who don't know who he is, he was also known as the co-ed killer. He was a necrophile. He murdered actually his grandparents and his mother on top of, I think, like 20 plus college women. But he stood at 6 feet, 9 inches, and his IQ, I think, was 149. He was a genius.
Yep.
And this actor portrays him so well. And Ed Kemper has this very, almost like, very soft-spoken and very unassuming.
Except when you look in his eyes.
And when he talks about what he did.
Yeah, just very matter-of-fact.
Very matter-of-fact.
Because that's his reality, and he's got that, the actor who portrays him is really great because he's got that dead eye thing that we find with so many of these kinds of predators. And there's widely, you can Google Ed Kemper, and there's video of his interviews and things like that as well, because he spoke to the press too. Ed Kemper in the first season, I don't know, that was just so awesome. And it sets up the end of the first season and Holden's reaction to Ed, and that's sort of the crescendo, and we don't really know what happened to Holden at the end of that season. He has a panic attack.
Right. And the very end of the first season also starts to introduce a very popular serial killer that will continue to go on, I would think, through all 5 seasons.
I bet.
You start to see the way he begins to orient himself to neighborhoods. They start to introduce Dennis Rader, who's the BTK killer, but not his killings or anything. You just start to see sort of his early, I don't know, how would you describe that, Shannon? It was,
I don't know how he was practicing.
Yeah,
growing up.
He works at a security.
They show him as a regular guy. Let's put it that way. They're introducing. I would imagine he'll be the big like series 5 finale. It will be him because the idea is that he killed over a couple of different decades. 1974
to 1991.
Yeah, so that's why they're using him as like the long tail follow from, because he. And that we know of, it was 10 murders over that time. We're going to get into this a little bit later, but sort of, he called them projects. So he would really sink into each one. And I did not mean that as a euphemism for his killing sinking in. But, that's what it was. So BTK, what else about season 1? Do you remember what you were thinking after you watched the first season of this show?
I watched it way after it was released, which is really interesting because usually I'm right on top of shows like this, but I didn't really know of it. I still think to a certain extent when you bring it up to people, they get it confused with the Unabomber one. Manhunt or whatever.
That was good too.
Which was good, but I think this has a cult following. So I know a lot of people who said they've heard of it, but they haven't watched it. And if that is you as a listener right now, I want to say it's really one of the best shows I've ever seen on television. I had very different reactions after the second season, both very good for very different reasons. But I think that season 1 really captured the science of this, of the behavioral science piece that I think no other show has ever delivered. And I really appreciated that. And because it was so character driven, it captured me. You can go onto YouTube, you can go onto Netflix, you can go onto Google and search any true crime story.
Oh yeah.
But the way that they were able to bring these characters to life, you really feel in it.
You bet. I mean, that's good product, right? You've got the heroes and the bad guys, and the formula is clear and it's a successful one. I tuned in because I like the story of the beginning of the behavioral unit. I'm familiar with that story, and I wanted to see what they would do with it. They had early yays for the series, so I tuned in for that, not expecting that it would be so successful with the characters and that I would care about them and they'd have their own personal arcs, but that's what good stories do. So it's not that it's a surprise, it's that I'm surprised at how well they did it. And then I was also surprised not surprised that I liked it, but I was pleased that Ed Kemper was so very well portrayed.
The actors were fantastic.
They are. Kathy and I can be reached on Instagram at Terror Talk Podcast, Twitter at Talk Terror, or on our Facebook page, Halloween All Year Long. If you like email, it's terrortalkpodcast@gmail.com. So reach out. If you like us, you can help us by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. We appreciate you so much. We upload new episodes every Wednesday. Keep coming back. But first, stick around for more of our show. Wow, I was so excited for season 2, but I also, like most of the internet, was like, how long are we going to have to wait?
It was excruciating.
I saw a meme the other day that said, if I have to wait 5 years for season 3 of Mindhunter, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
Which, very dramatic.
Yes.
Nobody needs to kill themselves.
But it was excruciating after watching season 1 and having to wait that long. And I watched it after most people had, so I can only imagine.
Right.
Man, was it worth it?
I know, it's so worth it. Okay, so we're going to quickly play the trailer for season 2 to set us up, get us in the mood. So here we go.
January 1974. They just moved in 2 months prior. My partner and I were first on the scene. He was feeling for a light when something bumped him. That's when we found the little girl hanging from this pipe.
Jesus. I found someone to take over who will be very good for the BSU. He wants to expand the unit, and he intends to make our approach practice.
Tell me, who's the one you want more than anything?
Manson.
I'll get you Manson.
This is $100,000, and it's all yours if you help us identify the persons behind the murders of our children in Atlanta.
Another child reported missing in Atlanta. I'm sending you both. I want you there for the duration.
So all these children, one killer?
I believe that to be the case. It's statistically rare for serial killers to cross racial lines, sir.
It's also statistically significant that the Klan kills black people.
You get him out of there. If he blows this, Gunn will rethink his investment.
I'm asking you as the leader of your department. What did Holden say that so offended the city?
We need to stay focused. If you're distracted...
I have some things to deal with at home. It's personal.
She had someone else's underwear stuffed down her throat.
It's 10:30. Do you know where your children are?
This is one predator.
What if you're wrong?
I'm not.
You arrogant, self-serving twerp.
We can't have tunnel vision, Holden.
What evidence is there to suspect the Klan?
Son, we've got 19 dead black children. You telling me that's a coincidence?
One more thing. Manson is small. Like really small. Try not to stare.
I love that line.
I just want to say I'm waiting for Universal Halloween Horror Nights to do a Mindhunter maze.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would be cool. Maybe year 4 or something, season 4 or something. We thought we would go through, just as a context about talking about season 2 is when I was doing a little bit of research after having watched it, I figured out that there are 10 real life serial killers either portrayed or talked about in the series. So that's pretty cool. The first one obviously is Manson. And for those of you who haven't heard our 6-part series on Manson, like, we'll just refer you to that. We don't really need to go into that. But for those of you who might be living on some kind of different planet, it's the 50-year anniversary. In August, it was the 50-year anniversary of his killings. He was convicted of 7 murders. There were actually 9 murders total, but he was convicted of 7. And they also talk about Tex Watson. So that's like 10 and a half people that they talk about. Mm-hmm. They talk about Tex as well.
He was in it. They interview him.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right.
They interview him.
Oh,
yeah,
that's right.
And he was great.
That's right. That he was great. What did you think of Manson's portrayal? Yeah.
I thought it was okay. I think Manson's been portrayed so many times.
I know.
I think that he looked like him, but I feel like it was overacted personally, because I think it's really easy to be the kind of crazy, hey, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't. He was my least favorite.
Yeah, and maybe that's like, it could be that we've seen him so many times. It
might be.
It could be that we just did a 6-part series on him and we were really sick of him. It's hard because I definitely think that Manson should be portrayed as the nutty person that he is, because that's who he always was in interviews. He couldn't help himself. He wasn't calm or anything in interviews. And so maybe like what you're saying, I agree, but I think it might be because it just wasn't acted as well as I think maybe it could be. Because if you watch the interviews of Manson, he's a nut job in interviews.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. I don't think it was. I think it was the actor.
Okay.
That's how I feel. Is I feel like it was. Manson was a nut, but I feel like what this actor did was take that and amplify it rather than become Manson. He was like, Manson's just a nutcase, so I'm just going to be a nutcase.
Yeah, right. It wasn't coming from both you and I have studied acting back in the day, and so it wasn't coming from a place of really embodying that. That would just be my critique, was just sort of that it needed to be coming from a more authentic place.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because when you watch him in interviews, I have to say, we're starting out with a little bit of criticism, which I think is good because we love this show so much. But in the dialogue as well, and I would have to look at the dialogue pure without the actor in my head, but Manson was really rhythmic and rhyming when he would speak. And I didn't get that either. So it might be some kind of a combination between like what was written for the actor and then the actor, because I don't know, just didn't quite. It was fine. And it wasn't like it lasted forever, but it lasted a little bit longer than I would have liked because it wasn't going well. But know.
I feel like for people who haven't really studied him or read him or watched him, because he looked like him,
it'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Yeah,
but for people who have spent the amount of time that you have and now I have, I just didn't buy it.
Yeah,
and it started to feel uncomfortable watching it.
Yeah,
for
like
me,
I went and got a drink.
Like a bad performance on American Idol. I was like, this scene needs to end.
Yeah, can we stop now?
Yeah.
But they couldn't because Holden says, like, you know, there's said it in the trailer, like, who's the interview you want? Well, Manson, of course. So they had to make it a thing, right?
Yeah, and that's what I think was so disappointing for me
land.
is they tried to sell season 2 with Manson, which I don't think Manson should have been the selling point. I think it should have been Dennis Rader, but
it's timeline.
Yeah.
It's purely timeline. Because if season 2 is 79 to 81, they have to deal with it because he just went to prison in 79 or 8, you know, whatever. So, it's purely timeline. They kind of had to do it, and I imagine obviously they're not idiots. They know the anniversary was here. They know. I mean, you know, all that stuff is very well thought out in Hollyweird. So then Ed Kemper, obviously, committed of 10 murders, co-ed killer.
I think that's not including his grandparents and his mother.
Maybe we should do a series on him. Apparently he turned himself in because he killed his mother, and then the guilt over killing his mother.
His mother, he decapitated her, and then basically had sex with her head.
Yes, there's that.
Not even basically, he just did.
Yeah, we say basically because it's hard to say. It's like, basically, in a very basic way.
And he talks about it in a very basic way, and how hard it is to sever a head, and how
maybe that's
thick
his
the muscular tissue is. Yeah.
He's like, people, I love that in the series when he's like, people underestimate how difficult it is to dismember a body.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I love you for all kinds of sick reasons. I mean, please don't come to my house. But,
yeah.
And so after he killed his mom and did those disgusting things, he called the police to turn himself in, and they didn't accept his confession over the phone, which I find amusing. And so he tried again, and they finally did accept his confession. And he currently resides in the California Medical Facility, CDCR, in an all-male state prison.
Is he still at Vacaville?
Is CDCR the same thing as Vacaville?
Oh, CDCR is just the correctional term.
So California Medical Facility is what I read is where he's at. So, you know, he's there. So that's a good place for him. Berkowitz is another person that they deal with. So Berkowitz is the son of Sam, convicted of 6 murders, wounded 7, because if you'll remember, he was the one going around shooting people in cars, and he would often go up on the passenger side, right? So he would kill often the woman. So that was what it was thought, was that the female on the date was the target, because he would go to the passenger side, and in those days, that was where we ladies sat, apparently, on a date anyway. So he's also famous for the Son of Sam laws that were instituted so that criminals couldn't make a profit on their crimes in the media, because he was one of the first people that was trying to make money, sell his story and all of that.
Yeah, believing that the neighbor's dog was possessing him and giving
hoax.
him. But so much in the season really unravels. They talk about his narcissism around. He couldn't help himself but to basically state that he was full of shit. Like, gave himself away because he couldn't actually admit to being sick.
Yeah, the debunking of it, right? And yeah, for those of you who don't know, the whole listening to his dog and killing people because his dog said so was all a hoax. I bet some people don't know that, like, because it's so famous that was what he did, that he was listening to Satan and, you know, schizophrenic and following those kinds of things. And that's actually not, I think maybe.
Once he was arrested and, you know, contained and all that, he admitted that was BS. I just want to also say that this actor was remarkable. And although it was just a cameo, at least for this season, I thought he was awesome.
Yeah, no, he was really great. You were saying you think maybe that's prosthetics that he was wearing?
The way that they made his nose, if you look at Berkowitz's face, either they found an actor with the same exact dimensions of his nose and the way his cheekbones sat, or they used makeup. His eyes, all of it. It was uncanny.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at a picture of the real Berkowitz right now, and it's really freaking similar. So, but I also think that they did that. I mean, what I'm hearing now in our conversations, like all the actors really, they made a concerted effort to have them be doppelgangers, right? He is also in prison. He's, found God, and he goes by the Son of Hope now. I don't know if you knew that, but with regards to season 2 of Mindhunter, I also think, one of the things that they did throughout the season, which I thought was so strikingly adept, was that they really show you how they started to come up with profiles. So with Son of Sam, it was like they got into knowing the lusting for control. Like how they caught him was his lust for control of his media, of his story, of the way he was portrayed, of who he was seen as, his infamy, right? And that's how they caught him. And so they realized, oh, okay, this is what, and they put, this whole season puts together all of these little puzzle pieces of how they started to profile, which I think is super cool.
When all of these children go missing between, William's case and Rader's case, you can see that they choose certain people, to go back and start to ask questions. Well, what would you do in this scenario? And you really start to see how the profiles start to build, and they organize it in such a way that for someone who doesn't know this stuff or doesn't have a background in this stuff, it's really easy to follow. And I appreciated that because not everybody watching the show has any idea how this stuff works.
Yeah.
And I thought that they did a good job in organizing it too.
Yeah, you're sort of, it's just really well done because they're laying out the personal stories, they're laying out the professional story, they're laying out all these serial killers, and that's always interesting scenes. And then they're also telling you the story of how it all got developed. So it's psych meets crime meets TV meets personal tragedy. Like it's all it's good stuff. Anyway, okay, next one. Dennis Rader, who is the BTK Strangler. So he's the one we were talking about earlier. He killed from 74 to 91. He was convicted of 10 murders, but suspected of many more, I imagine.
What's so interesting about this guy and what's so remarkable about his profile was his ability for inhibition and to be able to stop himself. Because like you were saying, over 3.5 decades, 10 murders are really not a lot. For most serial killers, it would be much more compulsive.
Yeah. So what I can tell by that, the stalking and the killing, he called them projects. He when he stood up and allocuted in court, he said, well, I call them projects, but I spent time stalking and killing and working on each project at a time. That's a particular kind of psychology. That's the hunt, that's stalking. And he was a sexual sadist, so that makes sense. The ramping up of it was very important. And from 74 to 91, which I guess actually is 2.5 decades, the 80s.
It was the end of the 70s, the 80s. Yeah.
Just so we're, I'm not counting wrong. The other thing I think is interesting is the double life. He led a double life. He had
a wife,
family, job, all of that.
Church going guy. His daughter just did a 2-hour interview, and she's written a book. I believe it's called The Serial Killer's Daughter. I think her name is Carrie Rawson. It's a really good interview, and she speaks a lot about growing up with him as a father and how, according to her anyway, this is not what's evidenced in season 2 without giving anything away. According to her, the family had no idea that any of this was going on. And granted, there's a big difference between being a sexual sadist and a serial killer. They're not always mutually exclusive. Sure. She did say that, he, for the most part, he was a very calm guy. She only saw him get angry twice, that they never, after talking to her mother, after he was arrested, that they never really suspected anything like this. So I wonder how much of that too plays into, 10 murders in 2 decades and taking his time. At the end of the first season, like we were talking about in the first part, they really set up how he spent at least a year or two working in like home security, learning how to break into homes, learning how to stalk people, what their schedules were like between Monday through Friday. This was really was a project for him.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about him, is all the time. And like you would with a career spanning over decades. I mean, he would have just kept going.
He studied.
Obviously. Yeah. It's interesting because he did the whole taunting letters thing. He
to the police.
Yeah, to the police. So he had that. I mean, just in this moment, I'm thinking that's him stalking the police, right? That's his.
Yeah.
That's like his 11th project.
Yeah,
is the way I kind of see it in my head. Is that.
How many people could he toy with?
Yeah, he was. That was part of the sadism, right? He's toying with you. He's gonna toy with anyone. He's toying with the police, and that was like your B-side of thrill for the day is taunting the police. So, he was president of his church's council. He was,
I think there's a line in the second season where they say this guy. No, they don't know it's. Yeah, demonstrated where this guy does not go to church.
Right, and I imagine in season 3 or 4 they're going to figure out this guy's a church guy.
Yeah, I mean he was like in a pastoral position, I think, a youth pastoral, something like that.
Well, he was definitely on the church council. So
yeah.
Well, and that's interesting for us to note, actually, because we were saying before about how they lay out, how they built. That's not the one they got this season, right? Like they got things about lusting for control. They got things about race. They got a lot of other different kinds of profiling factors, but they didn't get this one. And, male, female, blah, blah, blah. They still got a lot to go, right? As from what we know.
We still do.
Yeah, exactly. It's as we've always said, we're always learning and growing. So William Jr. Pierce was the guy in season 2 who loved sweets.
He was fantastic. And I couldn't stop watching him.
He was awesome because he really personified how we can laugh sometimes at people who are really sick in these ways, especially when they're narcissistic, because his IQ in real life barely broke 70, but the whole premise of the interview was like, I'm really smart and I know everything. And then he kept syllogisms, right? Like he kept using the wrong word for
Holden would just say, he'd go, I'm just like captivated by your intelligence or whatever. And he was such an asshole. He was so confident that he was using the right word. That scene I was glued to that scene.
Yeah, it's one of the ones I'll watch again, when you rewatch a series and you kind of like fast forward through the plot points that and you go to all the scenes with the serial killers. That's why we're kind of highlighting him too. Yeah, he was amazing. So he's currently in prison as well. So William Henry Hance murdered 4 people in 1978. And I don't remember a ton about that interview, but what I do know is that he was very much I'm a humble guy, I didn't do it. He was playing that whole rap. And that is what he ended up doing throughout a lot of it. Just so you know, the guy that Bill is based on, the FBI agent, his real name is Robert Ressler, I believe. And he did this guy Hance's real life psychological profile. So, as we do in media, as people do when they write, they distort time. So we collapse and expand time. And sometimes people who don't work in entertainment get upset by that. Like, that's not the order it happened in, and and that's fair, except if we did it that way, you'd be reading an autobiography on screen, right? Like, it'd be super boring. So this is one of those moments where they obviously expanded time a little bit because what we know is the real life guy had done this guy's psychological profile. So it's just not part of the story that they told. And then there's Elmer Wayne Henley, murdered 7 people by the age of 17. So he's the young dude that we see. He murdered them at the behest of Dean Carell, who they also mention, who was eventually killed. Henley eventually killed Carell. Henley is currently still in prison. Carell is dead. Carell was the Houston Candyman killer. That's who he was.
It was the Houston mass murders.
That's right.
And he was known as the Candyman.
Gotcha.
Elmer worked under him, I guess. Yeah. Raped, tortured, murdered 28 teenage boys.
Right.
And this is the guy, Elmer's the guy they go to when they're trying to figure out the Atlanta child murders, I believe, right? They're trying to profile.
Yeah, that's the kind of guys that they're interview the whole time. They're they're having personal stories. They're trying to figure out the Atlanta murders and who did them. And they're also trying to do their job and interview all these serial killers and learn how to profile. So there's like a lot of moving parts.
And this is when they still potentially believe that the Atlanta child killer is white.
Yeah. So the guy I just talked about, William Henry Hance, who they interview, who was the person who Ressler did the psychological profile of, he was part of that too, because in that psychological profile, the real life one, Ressler talks about how the killer was African American and had been in the military, and like there's these things that no one had really, I don't think, put in profiles necessarily up until that point, because it was all very new. And so I think one of the reasons why they portray him is the race piece, because the Atlanta murderer is Black, and so they were building that story of how they figured out how they could profile an African American person.
Yeah, and I think that what I liked about this piece of the show was they sent a Black guy and a white guy out onto the street, basically into the inner city, and they started to put together, like, these kids are not going to get into a car with a white guy. And the way that they did these experiments was really fascinating. I really liked that part of it a lot.
And I like the Black actor and the part that he portrays where they bring him in and he starts to do the interviews with Holden, because the other guy can't always go because he's got family issues and all that. And so Holden doesn't go alone, and they bring him in, and I really liked him. I really like him, and I really like how they added that, because he's kind of funny too and has his own kind of personality, which is all we ever asked for, is just a little bit of a personality there. Paul Bateson, murdered 7. Yeah, Paul Bateson. So FYI, his whereabouts are not known. We do not know if he's alive or dead. He did go to prison for a bit, and then they released him. And so we don't know where he is.
The actor who played this role too was really good and looked a lot like him. But I have a fun fact about Paul Bateson. Are you ready?
Please, I like fun facts.
Okay, so we've talked about The Exorcist on this show.
We sure have.
Okay. So in 1973, when William Friedkin, if you've all seen it, or if most of you have seen The Exorcist, there is a scene where they go to New York University Medical Center because they believe that Regan is potentially having some neurological stuff. And so they shoot the scene of Linda Blair undergoing a carotid angiography procedure. Well, Paul Bateson is working as an X-ray tech in the university at that time and is in that scene.
Really?
Yep. And so I'm gonna show this to Shannon real quick. You guys can't see this, but
you can Google it, I'm sure. Oh, look at that. There he is. Okay.
And he was known to be, most of his murders, I think, were in the meatpacking district in New York. So it would make sense that he was working there, and he just ended up as an extra in The Exorcist.
Happened to be a gay gentleman, yes?
Yep.
So that's also another piece of this, right? So we're starting to introduce
a lot of
race.
diversity.
Yeah. So that's what I'm getting from this whole season, is that they started to realize that it wasn't just, although there's a predominance, of course, of straight white males being serial killers. We understand that now from the statistics over several decades. But what they're showing you is that there's all the diversity starting to come in.
Yeah, and what they also did was take it one step further, which was educated the audience watching the show about how they started to separate organized from disorganized crime. So that when there's a scene where they're going through the different, I can't remember which case they're working on, but they're all walking through, okay, would you put him in organized or disorganized? Would you put him in so they start to introduce that too, which is cool.
Yeah, it's a little like, when you're writing something or doing a project and you've got to put everything on, 3x5 cards, and you're like,
if you choose this, go that way. If you choose this, go that way.
They were really trying to figure that out, and they were really, they're doing a research study. That's why there's a psychologist on board. They're trying to figure out where they go.
And we talk about that in our episode on myths about serial killers. We talk a little bit more about organized and disorganized crime. So if you want to check that out,
use that as a reference. So then let's go for the last one, and the one that just keeps on, that this whole season was sort of based on, whereas the first season was more based on Ed Kemper. this season was really based on they were really hunting a real guy. Now they're actually trying to put their profile to work, right? Like Ed Kemper, the first season was just all the background and trying to learn about and trying to get it up and running and the trials and tribulations with that. And now they're actually starting to hunt people and use what they're doing. And so Wayne Bertram Williams, who is convicted of 2 murders but suspected to be like 24 plus, was the Atlanta murderer.
This actor too blew me away.
I know, they were amazing. Even though most of the murders, I was really curious what they were. I had heard that this is what the season was going to be sort of based on. And I was really interested to know how they were going to handle it, because most of the murders remain technically unsolved, even though a lot of the evidence, and there's even like hairs and fibers and all kinds of stuff points to it. And the community at large has accepted that there were, 25 plus murders probably that he executed. I was just really interested how they were going to handle the whole fact that like most of it he didn't cop to or didn't get caught for. And I thought they handled it pretty well. I think he's another one where they were talking about the lust for control.
Oh yeah,
because he was crazy.
And a hebephile. I think this was one of also the first times they talk about the difference between a pedophile and a hebephile.
Oh right,
because he was all into the teens and the preteens.
Yes, under the guise of being a record producer. And he would put flyers out for new people, and then they eventually started to figure out that he wasn't, recording anything. That's one big piece of this season, so we won't talk too much about it. But if you haven't seen this season, you might want to just take a break for a couple minutes. I want to talk little spoilers about the end of season 2. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll do our what the hell. So if you haven't really seen the end of season 2, maybe skip ahead or come back later or whatever. So here we go. So yes, the end.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Before we get to the end.
Yes, ma'am.
I was telling a colleague of mine yesterday that the opening scene to season 2 might, for me, in my opinion, one of the most terrifying opening scenes I've ever seen, whether it's been a movie or a series. And I'll tell you first of all, whoever did the music direction on this, it's a song by Roxy Music called In Every Dream House, A Heartache. The lyrics to this song are so fucking disturbing. And I watched the opening scene 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
Because it got me so much. And I pay a lot of attention to music. When she comes in and they start to play that song and I start to listen, it's basically about a blow up doll. And as she's walking down that hallway, it terrified me so much, but in such a way that I went back and watched it 4 times.
Okay. We like the scares around here.
It was tormenting. It was terrifying. You didn't know, was she going to get, and then you put it together that that's the wife.
Yeah. Scary.
That scene got me more than, and the closing scene.
Yeah. And so then that's why we're in spoiler town. The closing scene was amazing too. I mean, I don't know. The thing I wanted to talk about with spoilers is the fact that, we have an FBI agent who's dealing with a kid, his own son, adopted son, who is basically a budding sociopath.
Yeah.
Psychopath, sociopath, we're not sure yet. But
this part of the story, by the way, because we know this is Bill's based, my understanding is this is not a true story.
But it's excellent storytelling.
Oh, it was great how they threw that in there.
Yeah, because it gives you that extra layer of, Bill's, it's like when we are therapists and we have people in our lives who are certifiable type of thing. It's something that's really interesting because he's a bit blinded by it at first. And then you just because in the field, I could see it coming. I mean, I didn't know that the kid was going to be part of a murder, but
you could see what coming?
I could see this was what they were building to, that this kid was going to be a sociopath. I just saw it like in the way they portrayed his affect, the way
in the first scene in the car. Are you talking about? Yeah.
Yes. And then throughout, whenever they would talk about him or allude to him, and they would talk about his behavior, I just thought, we're in trouble. Now, Kathy and I both work with kids, so it's maybe a little bit easier for us to pick out the fact that a kid is going down a particular road. A lot of the kids that are on the cases that I supervise are kids who have conduct disorder and are in the system and have these kinds of criminal behaviors. And so, and mental health, right? That those two things don't always go together, as we've spoken about before, but when they have both, it's just, you could tell he has, he wouldn't speak for most of the the trauma, all of the stuff. It's like, this kid is, unless there's early intervention, which we'll see what happens, he's going down that road. So
what I was saying to Shannon before we recorded was they kind of leave it up to the audience to decide, because they don't flat out say that he's directly involved. They really make it look like he's more traumatized. But I think that's also told from sort of the mindset of the mother, who's in complete denial.
Right.
And like you said, as the season goes on, Bill's internal conflict, when he's sitting with those guys at the work thing, and that just hits him, and he knows he's screwed.
Yeah, you see him make the connection between what he does. And often what we do on this show is when we do our true crime psychology shows, is we go into the childhood and track that. He's starting to do a little bit of that, which the FBI wasn't really doing. They're picking out behaviors, but this is the way, I feel like maybe the way they're kind of introducing the childhood piece of this, and how to see it earlier and earlier.
Absolutely. It's part of the profiling piece. And like we were saying as well, no child, if a child witnesses something like that, they're not going to use crucifixion as a way of bringing this kid back. They're going to bone out of there and run home crying, unless they're somehow completely okay or unaffected by what's going on.
You
in
and
that
I
moment.
are running away.
We're running away. The other piece I wanted to bring up was that really started to open up the humanity of not only Bill, but Wendy Carr in this season, and how you start to see her trauma and her interpersonal stuff, and she meets the bartender, the woman, and in the first season she presents as really stoic and together, and then you get behind the scenes in this season. And this season, really, the majority of her character in this season, other than one or two interviews, is her personal life.
I was struck by that in the first season too, is that as the psychologist in the crew and as the female, they go more personal quicker, which makes sense. And in the first season, I think it's just the first season, they sort of show who she is in a relationship, because she happens to be in a long-term relationship when the show starts.
And with a woman, because they're both in, they both find her attractive, and then they don't expect.
Right. And she's passing, in other words. She's not telling. It's a time when gay women had to pass in those kinds of environments.
Well, and especially in mental health, it was just being removed from the DSM.
And then to work with the FBI, like she was passing, and very, very scared that would be a done deal. She'd be gone. And I believe her. I mean, I didn't live in that climate, so I believe that's the way it was. And then there's a breakup, and she can't that relationship goes away, and so there's that. And then there's the whole like leaving the tuna can and with the cat, and then the cat doesn't come back, and the ants come. And I don't quite know what that was about, but that was interesting. And then so then now
there's more there with her.
Yeah, for sure, her sex life, etc. So she's an interesting one. And I have a feeling, the last thing I guess I would say about it is, I think that this Bill's personal story with her son being compromised mentally is also going to be a 5-year part of the 5-year journey, right?
Something bad, something worse is going to happen.
We're going to see that kid grow up and kill people and stuff, I have a feeling, or something like that.
And then obviously the evolution of Dennis Rader through this too.
Yeah.
And the fucking I'm telling you, the opening scene and the closing scene, and maybe it's the mask, I don't know, but you guys, please go back and watch, listen to this song by Roxy Music. Just put it on in your car. And Every Dream Home a Heartache, that's the name of the song, and it's so fucked.
I don't think I will. It's very creepy. Kathy and I can be reached on Instagram at Terror Talk Podcast, Twitter at Talk Terror, or on our Facebook page, Halloween All Year Long. If you like email, it's terrortalkpodcast@gmail.com. So reach out. If you like us, you can help us by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. We appreciate you so much. We upload new episodes every Wednesday. Keep coming back. But first, Stick around for more of our show. Oh, hello. We're back. That was quick. What the hell? What the hell, Kathy? We haven't done this in a while. So for those of you who don't know what the hell is, these are the segments we do at the end of our show. And it's usually a little true crime-age. It's a case or a news item that we have not really researched, but we read it and we thought, what the hell? It's usually like stupid criminals. But, we branch out sometimes. Kathy, would you like to go first?
I would love to go first.
Okay, cool.
I would like to say that mine is more of a historical piece this evening and takes place during the Middle Ages, and it's labeled mass hysteria.
Oh, fair.
Okay. All right. During the Middle Ages, a baffling case of mass hysteria gripped an undisclosed convent in France. Okay, ready? The incident started with one nun meowing like a cat, with the rest of the convent soon following. So just picture that. You got one nun meowing like a cat.
Okay.
Catches on. You got about, what do they call that? A herd of cats?
Groupthink?
A group of cats?
A cattle?
The group would meow together for many hours at specific points during the day.
Oh my.
Okay, nuns and nuns. The incessant caterwauling baffled, infuriated residents of the surrounding neighborhood. That's how loud it was. So the nuns finally ceased their meowing after soldiers who were sent to the convent threatened to whip them with rods.
Oh, what are they doing?
And then a similar case also gripped a convent in Germany. It caught on all the way in Germany when a nun began biting her companions. Subsequently, it triggered a biting epidemic that spread to other convents and nunneries and reached as far as Rome. The nuns' bizarre behavior could be attributed to the period's intense belief in the supernatural. The nuns, with their cloistered lives and rigid religious expectations, were the ones most vulnerable to the episodes of hysteria.
So, hysteria, nuns caterwauling.
Groups, like a group of nuns meowing like cats so loud that soldiers had to come in and threaten to whip them with rods.
What the hell? Yeah, I'm confused.
I want to see a movie on that.
Yeah, right? Mostly because I want to see a writer explain what the hell was going on. My story is, so we were just talking about Dennis Rader, who otherwise known as the BTK Strangler or BTK killer. His eventual capture, I figured out in like looking at this episode, is a little bit of a what the hell. It's a little bit of a like, aren't you smart? Why don't this isn't very smart. It's actually the story of how Rader was caught. And it's a little bit what the hell, but it's also a little bit in line with what we've been talking about, like narcissism and how that can handicap you in many situations. What Rader does, at one point or another, he puts an ad in the paper, like a personal ad. They used to have those in the paper, for those of you who don't know. And it says, can I communicate with floppy and not be traced to a computer? Now, there were these things called floppy disks that went into computers back in the day. And what he's saying is, can I send you a floppy disk and not have it be traced to a computer? Now, we know these days that, yes, of course, it's going to be traced. But back then, that was not common knowledge. Like, we didn't really know what would happen. And then it says, be honest. Under miscellaneous section 494, Rex, it will be okay. Meaning you'll see what it says. Run it for a few days in case I'm out of town. Basically, like, if it's okay for me to send the floppy, run an ad in this section of the paper that says, Rex, it will be okay. And that will be my cue that it won't be traced. I will try a floppy for a test run sometime in the near future, February, March. So that's the ad he puts in the paper. And so he actually sends the disc to a local television station because he's looking for notoriety, right? The disc was quickly traced to a computer at his church. DNA testing soon confirmed that Rader was BTK because it matched all the...
Oh, my God.
A name he had taken himself, which stands for bind, torture, kill. If you didn't know, BTK is bind, torture, kill. So within days, the serial killer who'd been terrorizing Kansas forever was caught because he wanted to send a floppy disk. That's the way he gets caught. And then he said in the interviews when he's caught and they start talking to him, he says to the guy, I need to ask you, because it's the guy that I guess he's been talking to, I need to ask you, why did you lie to me? How come you lied to me? Meaning, like, how come you told me not to say? In his 32-hour interrogation turned confession, he didn't confess right out of the gate. He finally says, why did you lie to me? And the guy says, because I was trying to catch you.
Yeah.
Which makes me laugh. And then the guy that was interviewing, the cop or whatever, he says he couldn't get over the fact that I would lie to him. He could not believe that I didn't want this to go on forever. That's what it was. It's like, and then BTK says, like, I really thought Ken, the guy's name was Ken, I really thought Ken was honest when he gave me the heads up, like the signal that I wouldn't be traced. The floppy did me in. I really thought he was being honest. And this Ken guy's like, he really, like in those hours of interrogation, he just could not believe that I would lie to him, that I didn't want to have this friendship, quote unquote, right? This back and forth forever. He thought that this was good for me as it was for him. What the hell, man?
That's crazy.
I know. So that is our show. That is Mindhunter. That is our What the Hell segment. Thank you so much for listening. This is Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.